The higher a person's intellect, the more isolated they might feel. And often it isn't an accident, it's a conscious choice. Intelligent individuals tend to step back from the social whirl, not out of shyness or any sense of superiority. They simply perceive things that remain unseen by most. Carl Jung himself spoke of this, and it can be, let's face it, challenging. As one delves deeper into their own thoughts, the more difficult it becomes to engage in shallow conversations, navigate superficial social circles, or even sustain certain relationships. History tells us that luminaries like Albert Einstein, Nikola Tesla, and Arthur Schopenhauer largely avoided bustling social lives. But does this mean such a person is destined for a solitary existence? Or is it perhaps that these brilliant minds saw solitude as the very key to personal growth and intellectual evolution? Society has always regarded solitude with suspicion. Those who detach themselves from the group are often labeled as strange, antisocial, or even as difficult. But what if that viewpoint is fundamentally flawed? History suggests that many great thinkers regarded solitude not as a void, but as a precious gift. While society seems to recoil from the idea of being alone, some have realized it can be the most fertile ground for intellectual and creative advancement. Arthur Schopenhauer was among the first to explicitly suggest that solitude is the fate of exceptional minds. He believed that genius often separates individuals from the masses as their thinking is more refined, and finding worthy conversational partners for truly profound discussions becomes a struggle. Albert Einstein, one of the most dazzling scientific minds ever, placed immense value on moments of introspection. For him, quietude was the rich soil where groundbreaking ideas could blossom. He even went so far as to assert that simplicity and solitude in a calm existence stimulate the creative mind. This didn't mean he rejected human contact, but he keenly understood the power of isolation for deep reflection. Another compelling example is Nikola Tesla. Throughout his life, he avoided traditional relationships and any distractions that might hinder his intellectual output. Tesla was convinced that constant social interactions drained energy and diverted focus from what truly mattered: his inventions. Yet, was his reclusiveness a choice, or was it simply a consequence of his mind being so far ahead of its time? This is where a crucial point for consideration arises. Solitude can function as both a tool and a barrier. When someone withdraws to delve into their own thoughts, solitude becomes a space for creativity and self-discovery. However, if isolation stems from feelings of being misunderstood or an inability to connect with others, it can morph into a wall that blocks meaningful communication and restricts growth. Great minds discovered spaces to sharpen their ideas within solitude. But that isn't to say isolation is always beneficial. The line separating genius and social alienation is thinner than we often think. If society shuns those who think differently, is isolation a choice, or merely the only available path for those who can't find harmony in the outside world? The simple truth is that some find fulfillment surrounded by friends, while others prefer the tranquility of a quiet space. Carl Jung was one of the first to deeply explore this distinction. In his view, humanity can be divided into two broad categories: introverts and extroverts. Extroverts draw energy from the external world. They thrive on constant discussion and dynamic environments, and they feel invigorated by interaction with others. Introverts, on the other hand, follow the opposite path. Their energy comes from self-reflection, and they require quiet and solitude to organize their thoughts and recharge. This begs an intriguing question. Why are so many highly intelligent individuals introverts? The explanation perhaps lies in how their minds process information. Those who think analytically or reflectively require time to absorb ideas and establish connections. While quick-fire conversations and superficial interactions might be pleasurable for some, for keen minds, they can feel empty and draining. This doesn't imply that introverts dislike socializing. They simply prefer deeper and more meaningful exchanges where genuine ideas are exchanged. The trouble is that society tends to value extroversion. From childhood, we're taught to be outgoing, expressive, and communicative, these being seen as signs of success. Reserved children are often encouraged to be more outgoing, while introverted adults are sometimes perceived as shy or lacking in charisma. But this viewpoint overlooks a crucial fact. Many historical figures drew their strength precisely from silence. Jung cautioned against the dangers of attempting to adopt behaviors that are inconsistent with a person's true nature. An introvert trying to conform to an extroverted model of behavior risks exhaustion, as their mind isn't designed for a constant flow of external stimulation. Self-acceptance plays a key role in this dynamic. When a person understands and embraces their own nature without guilt, they're better equipped to manage external pressures. A preference for solitude doesn't signify social inadequacy. It simply indicates that the person's energy is directed inward rather than outward. Perhaps this is precisely why many geniuses have embraced solitude as a natural path, not because they rejected society, but because they understood that for profound thinking, they needed a space free from external distractions. In many instances, high intelligence creates a divide between a person and their surroundings. People with sharp minds often have deep interests, complex questions, and a unique perspective on the world that isn't widely shared. This can make social interactions challenging, as finding someone with the same level of intellectual curiosity can be a real challenge. Everyday conversations often revolve around repetitive themes, current events, and mundane details. For someone with a probing and analytical mind, such exchanges might seem monotonous and unfulfilling. This presents a dilemma. Such individuals don't avoid social interaction out of disdain for others, but because they rarely encounter truly stimulating conversation. Research indicates that people with high IQs tend to prefer limited social contact. This isn't due to arrogance or misanthropy, but to a natural need to conserve mental energy for what genuinely stimulates them intellectually. A crucial psychological factor is also at play: cognitive dissonance. When a person realizes that their thoughts and reflections don't align with societal norms, they might feel alienated. This sense of incompatibility often leads to the choice of silence over disappointing interaction. Another factor complicating connection is the high demand for quality communication. People with developed analytical skills aren't satisfied with vague answers or superficial arguments. They seek substantive discussions and exchanges of ideas that broaden their worldview. The price of genius is often loneliness, not because these individuals consciously isolate themselves, but because the world can't always offer them the kind of connection they crave. Thus, solitude becomes not just a social preference, but a necessity to prevent mental overload. Highly intelligent people typically possess heightened sensitivity to their surroundings. Excessive noise, crowds, forced conversations, and frequent interactions can be intensely tiring. Such overstimulation not only drains their energy, but can trigger genuine mental exhaustion. Their minds are in a constant state of activity, analyzing information and identifying patterns. While many can socialize without experiencing much fatigue, those with a keener awareness require periods of rest to organize their thoughts and prevent emotional burnout. Carl Jung explored this connection between intelligence and sensitivity, asserting that the more self-aware a person becomes, the more intensely they experience emotions and the weight of the world. Deep introspection expands perception, making a person more receptive to what's happening around them. This phenomenon is particularly noticeable in so-called highly sensitive people, a trait often seen in intuitive and thoughtful personalities. These individuals don't merely observe their environment, they absorb it. They pick up on emotions, vocal inflections, subtle expressions, and even energy fluctuations that most people overlook. Such heightened awareness can be a real advantage, enabling a deeper understanding of others and the surrounding world. However, it can also become a source of constant overload. The minds of such individuals never fully switch off this emotional and sensory radar, making prolonged interaction, crowds, and shallow conversations particularly draining. Beyond the emotional impact, there's also a physiological effect. Research indicates that highly sensitive people show more intense nervous system activation in response to common stimuli like noise, bright lights, or multiple interactions. While most people cope with these factors without much difficulty, those with heightened sensitivity experience profound fatigue after social events and need longer recovery periods. The challenges aren't limited to just the physical aspects. Psychologically, the need to adapt to the fast pace of society can become a genuine burden. Many feel constant pressure, forcing them to participate in interactions that don't align with their natural way of being. When such individuals try to withdraw to conserve energy, they're often perceived as cold, aloof, or indifferent. This social judgment creates a constant internal conflict: conform to expectations and risk exhaustion, or respect their need for solitude and risk being misunderstood. For many, This incompatibility eventually becomes unbearable. Emotional exhaustion from excessive socializing leads to an almost inevitable outcome: distancing, not out of a lack of interest in others, but because maintaining a constant social presence would mean sacrificing their mental well-being. This is why it's crucial to understand this mechanism to avoid the pitfalls of extreme isolation. Highly sensitive people should learn to set healthy boundaries, recognize when they need to withdraw to recharge, and ensure that this distancing doesn't turn into a permanent flight. Ultimately, respect for one's own nature is essential. There's nothing wrong with needing quiet to organize thoughts. But how can this need be reconciled with a society that insists on hyper-connectivity? We live in a world that values visibility, rapid communication, and intense socialization. Success is often measured by the number of connections, a constant presence at events, and the ability to interact with anyone at any time. But this vision of social interaction isn't for everyone. For those with a deeper appreciation of life, the pressure to be constantly accessible can be oppressive. The need to maintain superficial conversations, engage in forced socializing, and adapt to a frenetic social pace can cause significant mental fatigue. There's a misconception that those who are more reserved or prone to solitude are antisocial, arrogant, or even depressed. However, not everyone needs constant interaction to feel happy. The problem is that society elevates extroversion to an ideal. From childhood, children are encouraged to be sociable and communicative, while those who prefer to observe and reflect are pushed toward greater openness. In the work environment, those who speak more and put themselves forward are often perceived as more competent, even if they don't possess greater knowledge. This model creates conflict for more introspective individuals. Attempting to conform to it can lead to severe emotional exhaustion, so much so that some choose complete withdrawal from society. Carl Jung had already criticized this obsession with constant interaction. He argued that most social relationships are superficial, and only a few are capable of sustaining truly meaningful conversations. In his view, the pursuit of self-knowledge requires periods of solitude, as it is in silence that one can truly hear one's own thoughts without external influences. But being different from what's accepted in society doesn't mean being wrong. Everyone has their own way of interacting with the world, and there's nothing wrong with valuing solitude, as long as it doesn't turn into extreme isolation. The real challenge, perhaps, lies not in conforming to imposed social models, but in learning to respect one's own nature without guilt. In the end, do those who choose solitude really lose something, or are they simply protecting their energy in a world that demands much, but doesn't always give something in return? Being alone doesn't mean being lost. Chosen solitude is a space of freedom, a refuge where the mind can expand without external interference. Society often equates solitude with social isolation, but this view is mistaken. Those who allow themselves periods of solitude don't necessarily reject the world. They simply create an environment conducive to self-reflection and personal growth. Silence provides a unique opportunity for reflection without external distractions. It becomes possible to observe one's thoughts with greater clarity, recognize one's emotions, and understand what truly matters. This process is fundamental for those who seek internal growth, as it allows them to explore their personality without the influence of others' expectations. Solitude acts as a catalyst for creativity, but it is in balance with human interaction that ideas come to life and meaning. Constant stimulation and social contact can fragment attention and hinder the development of complex thoughts. In contrast, a mind that receives sufficient quiet space can foster the emergence of innovative concepts. But there's an even deeper dimension to the experience of solitude: the freedom to be fully oneself without seeking the approval of others. Many spend their lives adjusting their behavior to social expectations, seeking external approval, sometimes to the detriment of their own essence. However, learning to be at peace with oneself allows one to understand that true acceptance comes not from others, but from within. This path corresponds to what Jung called individuation, a process that leads each person to the full realization of their unique personality. Stepping away from worldly noise doesn't mean fleeing from reality, but rather creating a space for free development, without unnecessary influence. However, the freedom that solitude provides exists only when it is a choice. When it arises from fear or disappointment, it can become a prison rather than a springboard for growth. Therefore, it is important to distinguish between solitude and isolation. The former is a state of internal fullness, while the latter can be a reflection of suffering and disconnection from the world. The real secret lies in balance, being able to appreciate moments of introspection without completely severing ties with others, using solitude to strengthen the mind, understand one's emotions, and re-evaluate goals without falling into the trap of excessive isolation. Because true freedom lies not in the number of people around us, but in the ability to be at peace with ourselves, whether alone or in company. Being alone can be a liberating experience, but it can also become a burden. Solitude can be a conscious choice or the result of unintended detachment, and it is this difference that determines whether it becomes a source of growth or an obstacle to well-being. Voluntary isolation occurs when a person consciously decides to seclude themselves for reflection, study, creativity, or simply to organize their thoughts. This choice is dictated by a desire for self-knowledge and self-analysis. This is healthy solitude, where the person feels comfortable in their own company. In contrast, harmful isolation occurs when a person withdraws due to feeling out of sync with the world, misunderstood, or rejected. Instead of being a haven for growth, this detachment becomes a barrier that prevents the establishment of meaningful connections. So how do you determine whether seclusion is beneficial or harmful? The answer lies in its impact on emotional and mental state. If solitude brings clarity, tranquility, and creative inspiration, it is likely a healthy choice. But if it evokes sadness, apathy, and emptiness, perhaps it's time to reassess the situation. Another key factor is duration. Temporary detachment can be refreshing, but prolonged solitude without human interaction can negatively affect mental health. The absence of meaningful connections can lead to emotional isolation, making a return to interaction more difficult. Therefore, a balance between solitude and social connection is necessary. It is important to respect one's need for seclusion without guilt or social pressure, but it is also important not to sever all ties, as development occurs not only through self-analysis, but also through communication with others. In the end, the real task is not to avoid solitude, but to use it wisely. Not every lonely person is necessarily intelligent, and not every intelligent person is necessarily lonely. However, there is an undeniable link between deep thinking and seclusion. An analytical mind needs space to develop. Under constant exposure to superficial stimuli and repetitive interactions, it risks becoming scattered. It is here that solitude becomes a necessity for those who seek to deepen their intellect. But does deep reflection really require solitude? It all depends on the balance between the internal and external worlds. Those who allow themselves moments of seclusion can better organize their thoughts, reflect uninterrupted, and nurture their creativity. This time alone is crucial for intellectual development, as it allows one to think independently without external influences. However, the danger lies in turning this detachment into constant isolation. It's easy to believe that solitude is the only path for those who seek knowledge and growth. Some even avoid social interactions not by choice, but out of disillusionment, convinced that the outside world has nothing to offer them. This is one of the main risks of prolonged isolation, a gradual loss of connection with reality. When a person stays in their bubble for too long, they lose the opportunity to compare their ideas with other points of view and enrich their thinking through dialogue. Carl Jung warned about this danger. He emphasized the importance of self-analysis, while reminding us that personal development is based on a balance between internal reflection and external interaction. Excessive isolation can lead to mental rigidity, a reluctance to accept new ideas, and the illusion that solitude is the only answer. Another trap of isolation is the development of a sense of intellectual superiority. When a person distances themselves because they don't find stimulation in communication, they risk falling into the belief that no one around them can offer anything interesting. Such a mindset can further reinforce their isolation, cutting off valuable perspectives. So how do you avoid these pitfalls? The first step is to understand that intellectual depth does not exclude the simplicity of human communication. Not all conversations have to be stimulating or philosophical to have value. Even light interaction can provide interesting insights into how others perceive the world. Approaching them without constant expectation of intellectual discussion can make these moments more enjoyable and enriching. Another approach is to actively seek out environments where intellectual exchange is encouraged. Instead of random connections, it may be more helpful to join groups or communities with similar interests. Today, thanks to technology and access to information, it is easier than ever to find social circles where critical thinking, creativity, and reflection are valued. When a person is in an environment where intellect and introspection are valued, communication becomes natural and authentic, without the need to sacrifice the quality of discussions or feel forced and alienated. It is also important to practice active listening and cultivate genuine curiosity. Often, the feeling of a lack of interesting conversational partners is more related to how we approach communication than to a real shortage of stimulating individuals around us. Asking the right questions, showing a sincere interest in the perspective of others, and a willingness to step outside one's own intellectual bubble can transform even the simplest conversations into enriching exchanges. Learning comes not only from those who share our worldview, but more importantly from the contrasts between different ways of thinking. Moreover, finding a balance between self-analysis and social interaction helps avoid both mental overload and extreme isolation. Moments of solitude are necessary for organizing thoughts and deepening ideas, but it is through communication that these ideas are tested and strengthened. Learning to determine when to withdraw to preserve mental clarity and when to allow oneself light conversation without requiring depth from every exchange provides greater flexibility in dealing with the world. Intelligence should not be a factor of division, but an instrument that allows one to navigate smoothly between different forms of human interaction. Learning to manage one's need for reflection without rejecting simpler experiences can be key to a more balanced life, where solitude is an ally, but does not become a confinement that hinders personal development. The secret lies in how we use solitude. It must be an instrument of growth, not an absolute refuge. Time spent alone should serve to nourish the mind, structure thinking, and deepen knowledge, without diminishing the value of human connection. True intelligence is not limited to the ability to think deeply. It also includes the ability to balance between self-analysis and connection with the world. Isolation can be necessary for developing critical thinking, but it is communication, challenges, and new experiences that allow it to remain in motion and evolve. Ultimately, solitude should not be seen as a prison, but as a space of freedom, a place where the mind can breathe, strengthen, and return to the world with an even clearer vision. Being wise doesn't mean avoiding social life. It means knowing when to seclude oneself and when it's time for communication. Solitude can be a burden or a gift. It all depends on how it's approached. If we've learned anything here, it's that detachment from the world doesn't mean rejecting social life, but is often a response to a need for deepening, reflection, and personal growth. The greatest minds in history found fertile ground for the maturation of their ideas in solitude, but it was in exchange with the world that these ideas came to life. Silence, far from being emptiness, is often the most favorable environment for creativity and self-discovery. However, excessive isolation can become a trap. When a person completely cuts themselves off from the world, they risk losing touch with reality and missing out on important lessons. Therefore, balance is essential, allocating time for self-analysis while remaining open to communication and human connection. The real question isn't whether smart people avoid social life, but why they do it. This isn't always a conscious choice. Sometimes it's simply a natural reaction to a world that seems too noisy, too fast, too superficial. The connection between solitude and intellect is deeper than is commonly believed. Understanding this dynamic is essential for leading a more authentic life. The dominant social model doesn't suit everyone, and learning to respect one's need for silence and reflection can bring a real sense of freedom and mental clarity. If we must remember something, it's that solitude is not to be feared. It can become a valuable ally. Setting aside time for solitude allows one to focus and better understand oneself, and establish more genuine connections with others. Now I suggest you apply these reflections to your own life. Observe your moments of seclusion and analyze their impact on your way of thinking, perception, and behavior. Find a balance between self-analysis and communication, and see how this can enrich your individual journey.